You can live inside a place your whole life and still feel like a stranger in it. You know the smell of it, that specific, suffocating mix of old wood and silence and something that was never quite clean no matter how many times someone scrubbed the floors. You've known that smell your entire life, and somehow, standing at the front door right now, key already in the lock, hand already on the handle, your body refuses to go in. Your feet just stop. You stand there on the porch like a visitor, like someone who needs to be invited. And the worst part, you have no idea when it started feeling this way. There was a time when you ran through that door, when you couldn't wait to get inside, when this place was the whole world and the whole world felt safe. You don't know exactly when that changed, but it did. It changed so slowly you barely noticed, until one day, a day exactly like today, you're standing outside your own home and your chest is doing that tight, clenching thing it does when you're somewhere you don't belong. You turn the key anyway. You always do. The inside of the house is exactly the same as it always was. That's the problem. Same couch in the same spot, same framed photographs on the same wall, same clock in the hallway that's been 3 minutes fast since you were 9 years old, and nobody ever fixed it. Everything preserved, everything frozen, like a museum of a life you're not sure you chose. You drop your bag by the door out of habit. You don't even think about it. Your body knows this place in a way your heart no longer does. That's the strange thing about a home that stops feeling like home. Your muscle memory stays loyal long after your soul has already left. You walk through the hallway and you feel it, that invisible weight that settles on your shoulders the moment you cross the threshold. It's not sadness exactly. It's not anger. It's just heaviness. Like the air itself expects something from you. Like the walls remember every version of you that ever walked past them, and they're comparing. And somehow, every version of you they remember feels more real than the one standing here now. Dinner happens the way it always does. Plates, forks, the sound of a television nobody is really watching. Words exchanged that aren't really conversation. How was your day? Fine. Eat something. I'm eating. You've had this exact exchange maybe 10,000 times. You could script it with your eyes closed. And yet, tonight, sitting there with the fork in your hand, you feel a sudden and overwhelming grief for something you can't name. Not for anything that happened, for everything that didn't. For all the conversations this table never had. For all the feelings this house never made room for. For all the times you sat exactly here and felt completely invisible to the people closest to you. You look around the table. They're not bad people. That's what makes it complicated. That's what makes it hard to explain to anyone who asks why you feel this way. They're not bad people. They just never knew how to see you. And after a while, you stopped knowing how to be seen. Your room was the only place that was ever fully yours. And even that stopped being true somewhere along the way. You close the door behind you and the quiet is different in here. It's a chosen quiet, a defended quiet. You sit on the edge of your bed and you look around at all the artifacts of yourself. Old posters, a bookshelf you organized and reorganized 100 times, a window that always let in too much cold in winter. These things knew you, but even they feel like relics now, like evidence of a person you used to be, trying to become something, somebody, anyone. You remember lying on this exact bed at 15, staring at the ceiling, convinced that one day you would leave and everything would open up. You believed it so completely. And now you're back, whether by circumstance or choice, or that slow, invisible gravity that pulls some people home. Even when home is the thing breaking them, you're back. And the ceiling looks exactly the same, and you are not 15 anymore. and you don't know what you are anymore. Your room was the only place that was ever fully yours, and even that stopped being true somewhere along the way. You close the door behind you, and the quiet is different in here. It's a chosen quiet, a defended quiet. You sit on the edge of your bed and you look around at all the artifacts of yourself. Old posters, a bookshelf you organized and reorganized 100 times, a window that always let in too much cold in winter. These things knew you, but even they feel like relics now, like evidence of a person you used to be, trying to become something, somebody, anyone. You remember lying on this exact bed at 15, staring at the ceiling, convinced that one day you would leave and everything would open up. You believed it so completely, and now you're back, whether by circumstance or choice, or that slow, invisible gravity that pulls some people home, even when home is the thing breaking them. You're back, and the ceiling looks exactly the same, and you are not 15 anymore, and you don't know what you are anymore. Late at night, the house makes sounds. It always has. Pipes settling, the refrigerator hum, a door somewhere that doesn't latch quite right, tapping softly in drafts. You know every sound. You've cataloged them over years of lying awake in the dark, unable to sleep, too tired to do anything else. Tonight, you lie there and you listen. And somewhere in the quiet between those familiar sounds, a thought surfaces, a thought you've been swatting away for months. Maybe I was never meant to feel at home here. Not as a condemnation, not as self-pity, just as a fact, clean and simple and strangely, quietly freeing. Some people are born into the exact right place. They grow up and they look around, and the walls and the people and the rhythms of that place match something inside them perfectly. And some people spend their whole childhoods feeling slightly out of phase with everything around them, like they're broadcasting on a frequency nobody in the house can quite tune into. You've always been the second kind, and maybe that's not something wrong with you. Maybe it's just information. Morning comes the way it always does. Too bright, too fast, too indifferent to everything you worked through in the dark. You hear the house wake up around you, water running, cabinets opening, the same morning sounds of the same morning routine. And you lie there for just a moment longer, one extra minute inside the silence of your room before the performance begins again. Because that's what it is, eventually, a performance. You learn in homes like this how to take up exactly the right amount of space, how to be present without being too much, how to answer questions without really answering them. You learn to perform fine. You become so good at it that eventually the performance and the person blur together, and you spend years trying to figure out where one ends and the other begins. But this morning, just this morning, you notice something. A small, stubborn flicker. A version of you somewhere underneath all the performance and the heaviness and the years of quiet invisibility. Still there, still trying, still yours. You press your feet to the floor, and you begin again. Some wounds don't come from what was done to you. They come from what was never given. There's a particular kind of pain that has no clean origin story, no single moment you can point to and say, there, that's where it started. It's not like a broken bone. It's not like a car crash. There's no date to remember, no scar with clean edges. It's the kind of pain that accumulated, quietly, patiently, over years. The way water gets into old walls, not through one catastrophic flood, but through 1,000 tiny, unnoticed moments of dampness, until one day the whole structure is compromised, and you don't even know when it happened. You grew up in a house where love was present but never spoken, where it was implied through obligation, through provision, through the fact that there was food on the table and a roof above your head. And you were grateful. You are still grateful. But somewhere in the years of watching other children get held differently, spoken to differently, something in you took note. Something in you kept score without meaning to, not out of malice, just out of hunger. The hunger of a child who needed something specific that nobody around them knew how to name, let alone give. You became an expert at reading rooms. You had to. When nobody tells you how they feel, you learn to sense it. You learn to read the set of a jaw, the pace of footsteps down a hallway, the difference between a silence that's neutral and a silence that's charged. You became fluent in a language nobody taught you, the language of tension, of eggshells, of knowing exactly when to disappear. And here's what that does to a person. Here's what nobody talks about. It makes you unbearably perceptive and completely unable to trust your own perceptions, because you've spent so many years reading signals that were never confirmed or denied that you stopped knowing what was real and what you were projecting. Every relationship you walked into afterward carried that same uncertainty. Are they upset, or am I imagining it? Did I do something wrong, or is this just how they are? Should I ask, or will asking make it worse? You became someone who could sense an entire emotional weather system in a room, but couldn't trust the forecast. That's not a personality quirk. That's something that was shaped, carefully, slowly, without anyone intending it. There was a conversation you needed to have. You've needed it for years. You've rehearsed it in the shower, in the car, in that long corridor between sleeping and waking where everything feels possible. In the rehearsal, you're calm, articulate. You say exactly the right things. You say, I needed more from you than you knew how to give. You say, I spent years trying to earn something that should have been unconditional. You say, I'm not angry, I'm just finally being honest. In the rehearsal, they understand, or they don't understand, but at least the words exist outside your body for once, out in the air where they can breathe. But in the house, in the actual kitchen, the actual hallway, the actual dinner table, the conversation never happens. Because you see their face and you remember something. They are also carrying things nobody taught them to put down. They also grew up somewhere that didn't give them the tools. They also performed. They also endured. They also loved in the only language they were taught. And that doesn't make everything okay, but it makes it human. You started leaving before you actually left. Emotionally, psychologically, in all the small, invisible ways. You stopped bringing things home. Not physical things, emotional things. The good news, the hard days, the small victories nobody else would understand but you wanted to share anyway. You stopped trying to share them here because you'd learned the architecture of the response. A nod, a practical question that missed the point entirely, a pivot to something more manageable. And so you built a second life, the one you kept inside your chest, the version of you that laughed differently with certain friends, that thought about things in ways this house would never understand, that had ambitions and fears and desires that had no vocabulary in these rooms. You became two people, one for inside and one for out. And for a long time, you thought that was just how life worked, that everyone did this, that the fracture was universal. It took you years to understand that not everyone felt like a stranger in their own story, that for some people, the inside self and the outside self were actually the same person. You hadn't known that was possible. Nobody showed you. Grief is strange when there's no funeral. When nothing died but something is missing anyway. You find yourself grieving a childhood that technically happened, grieving the version of it that could have been different if different words had been said in different rooms on different evenings. You grieve the conversation at 16 that could have changed something. You grieve the hug that would have landed differently than all the others. You grieve being asked, just once, just sincerely, how are you actually feeling? And someone staying to hear the answer. This grief has no ceremony, no casseroles brought to the door, no friends calling to check in, because from the outside, everything is intact. The house is still standing. The family is still a family. Nobody lost anything that the world can see. Only you know the specific shape of what's missing. Only you carry the floor plan of the home that could have been. And the hardest part of this grief is forgiving yourself for feeling it, for grieving something you still have, for mourning people who are still alive. You looked it up once, late at night, phone under the covers like a teenager. You typed something like, "Why does home feel lonely?" and "feeling like a stranger in your family," and "childhood emotional neglect." And each search result felt like someone had been reading your mail. And you felt two things simultaneously: relief and devastation. Relief because the words existed, because other people had felt it precisely enough to write it down, because there was a name for the specific texture of what you'd been carrying. Devastation because you'd spent your whole life thinking it was just you, that you were too sensitive, too needy, too much and not enough in all the wrong combinations. But it wasn't just you. It was never just you. It was a child who needed certain things and a home that didn't know how to give them. Two separate facts, nobody's villain, everybody's loss. You put the phone down. The ceiling looked the same as always, but something had shifted just slightly, just enough. Like a window opened somewhere in a room that had been sealed for years. The next morning, you sat across from them at breakfast. Same table, same light, same clock 3 minutes fast. And you looked at them, really looked, maybe for the first time in years, without the filter of your own pain. You saw someone older than you remembered, someone carrying things in their posture, in the lines near their eyes, in the particular way they held their coffee cup like it was the only warm thing available. And you thought, they also are surviving something. They also have a room inside them nobody was ever invited into. They also learned to perform. They didn't give you what you needed, but they also weren't given a map. They also grew up somewhere that handed them broken tools and said, build a home with these. And they tried, in the limited, imperfect, sometimes painful way they knew how. They tried. That realization didn't fix anything. It didn't retroactively fill what was empty, but it changed the shape of your anger, from something sharp and aimed at a target to something softer, something that ached instead of burned. And aching, you were learning, was survivable. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't erase the hurt, but it loosens something. It gives you just enough room to breathe. One day, you will walk into a place or a feeling, and your whole body will exhale. That is the home you were always searching for. You started noticing it in small moments first, not grand revelations, not cinematic breakthroughs, just small, quiet moments where something inside you unclenched. The first one happened on an ordinary Tuesday. You were sitting in a cafe alone, not waiting for anyone, not working on anything, just sitting with a cup of something warm and a window and the sound of the world moving outside. And for approximately 4 minutes, you felt okay. Not happy exactly, not healed, just okay. Present in your own body without the low hum of dread underneath everything. You almost didn't notice it. You almost scrolled past it. But something made you put the phone down, and you just sat with those 4 minutes. Let them exist. Afterward, you thought about why that small, unremarkable moment felt so significant. And then you understood. It was the first time in a long time that you hadn't been performing for anyone, not even for yourself. You were just there, existing, quietly, without apology, and it felt, impossibly, like coming home. You started therapy. Not dramatically, not after a breakdown or a crisis, just quietly, on a Wednesday afternoon. You walked into a room and sat across from a stranger and said, "I don't really know where to start." And they said, "That's okay, most people don't." And something about that, the total absence of expectation in those words, made your eyes sting in a way you hadn't expected. Because you had spent your entire life trying to know where to start, trying to be prepared, trying to take up the right amount of space, trying to need things in ways that were convenient for others. And here was someone simply saying, you don't have to have it figured out to begin. The first few sessions, you talked around things. You were still performing, even there, still presenting the edited version, the coherent narrative, the version where you'd already processed most of it and just needed some fine-tuning. But therapy is patient, and eventually the rehearsed version ran out. And what came out instead was something raw, something that had been waiting a very long time to be heard by someone who wouldn't flinch. Your therapist asked you once, what would home feel like if it felt right? What would it feel like? You sat with that question for a long time, long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer, because you realized you didn't know. You had spent so long knowing what home felt like when it was wrong, the heaviness, the performance, the low-grade loneliness, that you had never actually constructed a vision of the opposite. You'd been running away from something without knowing what you were running toward. So you tried to answer, slowly, imperfectly, stubbornly. You said, safe, I think, like I don't have to monitor myself. You said, like I can be in a bad mood without it meaning something is wrong. You said, like I'm allowed to take up space, like my presence doesn't need to be justified. And as the words came out, something shifted, because you realized you had just described something real, something specific, something buildable, not a place, not a person, not a family configuration that would retroactively fix what had been missing, a feeling, an internal condition, a way of existing in your own skin, something you could, slowly, imperfectly, stubbornly, build yourself. You went back to the house, not because it had changed. It hadn't. Same walls, same smell, same clock 3 minutes fast. But you had changed, just slightly, just enough. You walked through the door and the heaviness was still there. But this time, you didn't fight it. You didn't perform okay. You didn't disappear into your room to wait it out. You just let yourself feel it. The weight, the old familiar ache, the grief for everything this place held and everything it couldn't. And here is what you discovered. Feeling it fully, without resistance, without shame, it moved. Not all at once, not completely, not permanently, but it moved. Like weather passing through rather than weather taking up residence. You stood in the hallway and you breathed, and you thought, I can love this place for what it gave me and grieve it for what it couldn't. Both things at once, without one canceling the other. That was new. That was yours. You began building it, piece by piece, the home inside yourself. It didn't look like anything dramatic. It looked like learning to sit with your own company without immediately reaching for distraction. It looked like having a hard day and telling someone, actually telling them, instead of saying, I'm fine. It looked like decorating a space the way you wanted, without asking anyone's permission. It looked like cooking something you liked, even when nobody else wanted it. It looked like small, stubborn acts of existing as yourself, fully, unapologetically. Some days you lost it entirely. Some days the old weight came back and the old performances returned, and you were 19 again in that room, staring at the ceiling, wondering what was wrong with you. But the difference now was this. You knew it would pass. You had evidence. You had those 4 minutes in the cafe and the therapy room and the hallway where you breathed and the weight moved. You had proof that you were capable of feeling at home inside yourself, even if only in flashes, even if only briefly. The flashes were enough to keep building toward. One evening, you called home. Not because you had to, not out of obligation or guilt, just because you wanted to hear their voice. The conversation was the same as always in structure. How are you? Fine. You? Fine. But underneath it, something was different. You listened differently. You heard the tiredness in their voice and recognized it not as a demand, but as information about their own long life, their own unresolved rooms, their own unfinished grief. You heard the love in the words they didn't know how to say. Still imperfect, still incomplete, but real. And when you hung up, you sat quietly for a moment, and you felt something you hadn't expected. Tenderness. Not the aching, yearning tenderness of someone who needs something, but the settled, clear-eyed tenderness of someone who has stopped needing it the way they used to, who has started building what they need from the inside out, who has learned, slowly, painfully, stubbornly, that you can love people for who they are, instead of resenting them for who they couldn't be. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. You understand now. Home was never going to be a building. It was never going to be given to you whole and complete by people who were also looking for it themselves. Home is something you grow, slowly, in the dark, without a guide. From the moments you choose yourself over the performance, from the conversations you finally had with the people who raised you, out loud or only inside your own chest, from the therapy room, from the hallway breath, from the phone call where you finally heard love in a language you'd spent years being unable to translate. Home is the moment you stop waiting to feel like you belong somewhere out there and start building the conditions for belonging inside yourself. You are not the child on the stairs anymore. You are not the person frozen at the front door. You are someone who has walked through every room of themselves, the dark ones, the dusty ones, the ones sealed shut for years, and decided to stay anyway, to renovate instead of abandon, to understand instead of only grieve. You will still have hard days, hard visits, hard phone calls. The house will still smell the same. The clock will still be 3 minutes fast. But you will be different. Because you finally know something that took every painful, confusing, quietly devastating year to learn. You were never without a home. You just hadn't finished building it yet. And now, room by room, breath by breath, day by day, you are. The most important home you will ever find is the one you build inside yourself, out of honesty, out of grief fully felt, out of love that no longer needs to be perfect to be real.